We're on the record. If you wouldn't mind, I need you to do a couple things for me. Can you say and spell your name?
It's Joseph Tyler Gayheart, Joseph Gayheart.
Okay, and Tyler, do we have your full permission to use this video any way we see fit?
You do.
Excellent. All right, I'm all set. Just make sure everyone's phones are off, and we're good to go.
We're doing interviews for the Nunn Center project, Combat to Kentucky, and I'm sitting here with Tyler Gayheart. Tyler, let's get right into it. As far as where you grew up, where were you born, and where did you grow up at?
I'm originally from Frankfort, Kentucky, and I was born in Ashland, Kentucky, but I ended up moving to Frankfort with my mom when she was divorced from my father. So I grew up in Frankfort.
Okay. What did your parents do for a living?
My mom worked for the state, and my father, who my mom was divorced from and I didn't spend too much time with, was an insurance salesman. And my mom still works for the state to this day, and they both live in Frankfort. And my mom has since remarried, and they both work for the state and live in Frankfort.
What was life like for you when you're growing up in high school? When did your parents separate?
My parents separated when I was around 3 years old. We moved to Frankfort, and my mom was a single mother up until about I was 6 or 7. My mom remarried John Arnett, which is now my stepdad, and it's a pretty funny story. They on the street we lived on, there was a man who lived across the street, and we would always play sandlot baseball in the back of our house, and there was 10 or 15 kids back there playing baseball, and we played with the typical yellow wiffle bat and a tennis ball and used our hands to catch with. And I remember one afternoon we were out there playing, and I look out in the distance coming from across the street. There was this man who had just moved in across the street carrying 2 gloves, 2 balls, and 2 bats. And my brother was out there playing with me too. And unannounced, he walked right up to my brother and I and handed us 2 gloves, 2 bats, and 2 balls and said, "You guys don't need to be playing with tennis balls and bats." And about 6 months to a year later, he married my mom and he became my stepdad. So, you know, looking back on it, you know, as a man right now, it was a pretty good move on his part, you know, and he's been the best thing that's happened to our family.
When you were in high school, and every veteran, I guess, started out somewhere, has their own story of what high school was like for them. But once you got into high school and you're starting to become more aware of, you know, what it was you were going to do when you got older, and you got out, what was life like for you then?
High school was erratic for me. I had friends in so many different circles, some going to college, some going to college on scholarships, athletic scholarships, some not going to college at all. And I think I fell right there in the middle between that, where I had the ability and the intellect to go to college, but I was mature enough to know that I was too immature to be successful in college. So I think I made a decision after I graduated. It didn't dawn on me until I had already graduated that I needed to do something with more importance and something that will put me in the right path to being successful. Because I knew at any given time that I wanted to get my education. I just didn't know how I was going to do it at 18. I didn't have a college fund. I didn't have an athletic scholarship. As far as academics after high school went for me, I was accepted to some of the predominant state schools here in the state of Kentucky, but I knew upon acceptance that I was neither mature or ready to go to college. So
you signed up then when you were 18, directly out of high school?
I did. I took the summer and I trained with the recruiter, and from there I went to boot camp. I received a phone call one summer right after high school graduation, and it was Sergeant Dustin Barnes from the recruiter's office in Frankfort. And he wasn't pushy, he wasn't overbearing. He just called and said, "Hey, what's up?" I said, "Not much." And it was probably during the time of the summer where I was not doing much, probably sitting around playing Xbox or something really insignificant. And he said, "You want to do something cool? You want to do something that means something?" And I said, "Well, teach me about it. Teach me and help me learn exactly what it is that you do as a Marine." Because up until then, I'd had some military figures in my life, but no Marines. I knew that they were an elite group of men and women, but I didn't know what it took to be a Marine. I didn't know what the typical Marine was like. So I spent a summer with him training. We would go running 5 days a week. He would teach me about the day in the life. He would tell me what my MOS was going to be like. He would tell me what his MOS was going to be like. He would tell me what it was like to be 8 years in. And I picked his brain, and really as a 18-year-old made a really informed decision looking back on it. You know, before then I would have just jumped right into something. But I knew this was going to be something really, really, really serious. And it was going to affect my family's life, my life. And so I spent a good time contemplating before I actually stepped in and signed the papers up in Louisville.
So it was more of a natural progression than starting out and then eventually everything falling in place to become a Marine, or was there something you could look back on and go, okay, that's one thing that really contributed to?
In grade school and for a few summers, I would go to Millersburg Military Institute, and I would spend what was 2 summers there, and that's where I got my first taste of the military lifestyle. Even though I was 14, 15 years old, I was living in barracks. I was being supervised and trained by former Army sergeants and NCOs. So they instilled this kind of regimented attitude in me at a young age. And when I left the first summer after being at Millersburg, I walked away from that wanting to go to West Point, wanting to go to VMI. And that was kind of the, I guess you would say, the big military influence that I had when I was younger. It didn't really come to realization until I was done with school and I was looking at all my friends who had, plans to go to college and just kind of had this carefree attitude that they were going to go to college and go to class and graduate in 3 to 4 years or 7 years. And, I turned to my parents and I said, what's it look like? And they said, well, you probably have to take some loans out, probably have to, make ends meet, but we don't, monetarily, we can't support you all the way through college. So I had to make a quick decision. And I think I fell back on my experiences at Millersburg. And so I don't think there was a certain point. I'm not going to say that it was always my dream, that it was something that I stayed up at night thinking about and I worked towards. But I think it was absolutely a decision that I made over the course of 7-8 years. I just didn't really know it.
You said that you weren't by yourself. You grew up around other military figures. Mm-hmm. Are you a first-generation veteran?
I am a first-generation veteran for my family. However, my grandfather was in the Air Force, really successful airman, one of the youngest tech sergeants in the Air Force at his time. Enlisted unbeknownst to the Air Force at 17 and ended up going to OCS. The sad thing is that I never got to meet him. He died when my sister was born. So I never got to meet him, but I'd always hear stories from my grandmother about how she was she would go from base to base with him and how she was with him when he went to OCS, when he went from enlisted to officer. And I remember my probably first week back after being in the actual Marine Corps in the fleet, my grandmother set me down and she said, "Go officer." And at that point, I had never received any advice from my grandmother as far as the military goes up until then, but she looked me square in the eye and she said, "Go officer." So I wouldn't say that there was a lot of military men or women in my life, but there was that time at Millersburg, and I always seemed to think that it was such a respectable thing to do, to serve your country and to make the sacrifices that the men and women did. I just didn't know what it meant when I was young.
What year was it that you enlisted?
2002.
2002.
August of 2002.
So by that time, we already had 9/11, and then
Mm-hmm.
the war in Afghanistan was ongoing. So even given an account that you had gone Millersburg before, how did your parents take the fact that you were going to be?
Well, like I said, I worked with Sergeant Barnes, a recruiter, for 3 months, and it wasn't a decision that I came to my mom and my dad and I said, "Hey, this is what I'm doing. You don't have anything to do with it. Later, I'm going to boot camp." It was something I warmed them up to, and I think I designed it that way for myself and for my parents. You know, instead of it being a dramatic, "Here it is, I'm leaving, I'm going to boot camp," you really can't do anything about it. I knew how my mom was. I knew that it was going to be hard for her to swallow about me going in the military. I told them why I was doing it, and I told them that it wasn't because I didn't think that I could make it through college, but I told them it was because I needed direction and that I needed discipline and that I wanted to be a Marine. After spending 3 months with Sergeant Barnes, I wanted to be a Marine. I wanted to go to boot camp and I wanted to earn that Eagle, Globe, and Anchor. And I think they respected that for you know, a 17, 18-year-old, you know, kid to look at them and say, "This is what I want. This is I want this respect. I want this title." And I think they looked at me and really respected that. And I call it, when people ask me about how my parents supported me, I say it was kind of a nervous support, this kind of cautious support and they had no, you know, some parents, they don't talk about things. They'll just acknowledge or not even acknowledge. My parents did the opposite. They intensified and asked every single question, at least my mom. She made sure that this was going to happen. She set my recruiter down in our living room and said, "Will my son go to combat?" And I remember it. And if Sergeant Barnes is watching right now, he's probably a gunnery sergeant now, and if he's watching right now, he looked my mom dead in the eye and he said, "No, ma'am, he will not." And looking back on that, it was comical, because there was no way for him to know that I would go to Afghanistan. And looking back on it, I was his second person he recruited. Nathan Noble was the first. So I don't know if he was hard up for a recruit or what, but I can honestly say that I had a really positive experience enlisting in the Marine Corps. It wasn't rushed. It wasn't, done out of impulse. It was a very methodical decision, and yeah. So.
Do you think maybe that your mom kind of supported you, but felt as though you were being a little naive about what it was that you were going to?
Oh yeah. And I think if I had a child or a son or daughter that was doing the same, I would have thought this. I would have thought the same thing. He's 18. They're promising him traveling, respect, admiration. You're going to be stronger, fitter, faster, sharper. You're going to be in the best shape that you've ever been. So all these things were laid out on the table, and as a young 18-year-old that, whose worldview didn't leave his front porch, this was something that I salivated at. I wanted to get out of Frankfurt. I wanted to go see the world. I wanted to, travel and see things and meet people. And of course, when my mom was asking me those 20 questions, of course I'm going to talk about, yeah, but I get to do this, I get to do that, and it's going to be something I've never experienced, Mom. And I think they thought that I was a little naive and not sure what I was getting myself into. But I think when I came back from boot camp and I had this air of confidence and this direction, and every time I would come back from the fleet or deployment, and I still had that direction, and I still talked highly of the Marine Corps. I never, during my whole time in, talked bad about the Marine Corps. It's given me, it gave me and provided for me so much. And yeah.
I think one of the biggest questions that civilians have about veterans, about people that serve in the military, is what makes them tick and what makes them want to go in. So in regards to that, what were you doing? I know that a lot of people will remember exactly what was going on, but what were you doing on September 11th when the attacks happened inside the United States, and what was your immediate reaction to that?
Anger. I was mad. I was confused. And I think as a 17, 18-year-old high school student, like I said, whose worldview didn't leave the high school gym or didn't leave his parents' front porch, I didn't know what it meant. I honestly didn't know what it meant. I didn't know. I knew that when it happened, that this was going to mean that the world was going to change, that the United States was going to change, and that the way that we operate overseas is going to change. But I don't think I ever reflected on how it made me feel, because I didn't understand it. I didn't understand what it was going to take to correct what had happened in New York. So I think I had this, you know, the whole country came together that year. You know, people were getting tattoos of tattered flags and tattoos of you know, bald eagles on their arms and on their chest, and there was this movement of patriotism that swarmed the United States, and it I guess it takes something like that to bring the United States together. But I think of how naive I was, and this was prior to even fathoming enlisting in the Marine Corps. I didn't know what it meant. And if I did, I would have enlisted right then. And, you know, I felt anger, and I felt like our whole country was tricked and deceived, and I just didn't know what it meant until I got to the Marine Corps, and you know.
What do you think you were most angry about?
You know, you watch the news and you see the people on the television that are in the buildings, and they would jump. And to have that level of desperation, you know, to just end your life, although you want to live, that hit home for me. That's what I thought about when I would go overseas, or I was having a bad morning and I was waking up having to go to PT, or I didn't want to put on my camis that morning, or, you know, I would think about why we serve and why we represent the people, why we represent civilians in the country we live in. And I think that's something that hit home with me.
A lot of people, once they get through the recruiter and they finally get separated away from their parents or their home for the first time, and then they finally start getting closer to San Diego or Parris Island, wherever or Fort Bragg or Benning or wherever it is that you do boot camp at, start to have some immediate reservations, or maybe some real enlightenment about what they actually just got themselves into. Did you ever have a moment like that once you first arrived at boot camp?
I think everybody does. I remember my trip to Parris Island probably more than I remember my deployment to Afghanistan. You're handed this sheet of paper, and this sheet of paper has all of the potential Marines recruits' names on it that are traveling with you. I remember the hotel that I stayed in Louisville. I remember it was right beside the airport, and I could hear planes going all night long. And it was a combination of that and going to Parris Island that kept me up. So I didn't sleep all night. And I woke up, and we hopped in this van, about 5 of us, all from Kentucky. And we boarded a plane to go to South Carolina. And we touched down in South Carolina, and everything's fine. We get off the plane, and we go pick up our bags, what little bags we have. I don't even think maybe a backpack. I don't even think we had a bag. We went down to the baggage claim, and there was this large man with a Smokey Bear hat on and this belt that was gold on the front of it. And I knew exactly who he was. And he talked in this, yelled and screamed in this raspy voice that sounded like somebody had taken his throat and just squeezed it. And he looks at all of us. He's like, "Get in there, get over there." And we're scrambling in this airport, and people are staring at us. And we get on this bus, and it's nighttime. And I remember being on this bus, and it's quiet. The drill instructor's not yelling anymore. I don't even think he's on the bus. And you're on this long, dark South Carolina road. If you've ever been on one, there's these tall trees, and all you can see is just trees and the lights of the highway. And I remember how hot it was there and how muggy it was. And you pull up to the Marine Corps Recruit Depot in Paris Island, and you get let off in front of the main building. And it's this massive building. It's got these pillars that go up, and there's an inscription on the top of it. And when you get off the bus, there's these yellow footprints. And as soon as you get off, there's about 5 drill instructors that will soon become your platoon drill instructors. They say, "Get on my footsteps." So you put your feet, as simple as it sounds, on these yellow footprints, and that's where it starts.
What do they say to you once you get out there and everybody's out and they're all on the yellow footprints?
Oh gosh, I really can't remember. It was like, if you want to leave now. I can't remember if it was, if you want to leave now, or you are now at the depot. This is, they start breaking you down. You can no longer use your name. You become this recruit. They take you in the hall, and you go into this room. This room full of phones. It's a phone bank up against the wall. And they say, "Here's a script," and it's taped to the wall. Said, "Call your parents, collect, and read exactly what's on the wall. Just fill in your name." And nothing is as calm as what I'm saying. It's all this blur of yelling and screaming and chaos. And you pick up the phone, you call collect, and you say, "Hi, Mom, this is Tyler. I'm fine. I'm at Marine Corps Base, or Marine Corps Recruit Depot, Paris Island. I'm fine. I'm healthy. Please do not call me." And you hang up. And you don't even, all you hear is hello from them. And that's when it starts. And that to me was the definition of cutting off that communication, that line that, a young 18-year-old has with his parents.
What did you feel like right then when you realized that now your home and all your safety and everything it is that you had just left is now completely untouchable and it can't protect you anymore?
I think I was in autopilot for boot camp. I was an autopilot. And this is true with the Marine Corps. This is probably more than likely true with every branch of the service. The schedules that the military and boot camp put you on, you don't have time to reflect. You're on to the next thing. You don't have time to think, "Oh man, I miss home," or "Oh man, that was hard. Man, I'm sore." Up, on to the next thing. And then, so there's no downtime to even reflect on the events that happen. That's why it's tough getting out of the military, because there is time to reflect.
So, what did you find in boot camp, either about the training or about yourself, maybe, that you hadn't expected, that you didn't really know that you had inside of you, or you weren't expecting the training to be to live up to what it is that you thought it would be?
Standing still. I hated standing still, and you had to stand still in formation. And the bugs in Paris Island, the sand fleas, were the worst. And I was never one of those recruits that locked my knees and fell over flat on his face. I actually kind of took on this sarcastic air about myself in boot camp, where nothing was serious. It's like, this Marine boot camp? Why is everybody so serious? Seriously. And, you know, there were these squad leaders that would yell out of their mind and all day long, and then I would look over them at night when we were in the rack and be like, dude, you need to calm down. Seriously. And in that sense, they probably hated me because I made PT a laughable event, where I know that one time we were going for a run around the track, and I was all the way up front, and I probably wasn't even sweating. And I didn't even look like I was having a tough time. And I think the drill instructor was really trying to work us in this circuit course. He was really trying to work us. And he was like, oh yeah, really? Well, run circles around us while we run around the track. So that became my job every time we would go to the circuit course, was to run circles around the platoon that was in formation running. Because he was like, well, if you're that good, do this. And it's kind of the reputation that I kind of grew with these drill instructors. And there was one in particular that would always pull me to the side, poke me in the side and say, you think you're better than me, don't you? You think you're better than me? Wait till I get to the fleet. Wait till I get to the fleet. And I never saw him in the fleet. I never had an encounter with any of my drill instructors, but I would say my big boot camp story would be at the rappel tower. And there was red hat or black hat instructors. And
who were the black hat instructors?
The black hat instructors were, they taught the technical skills of the Marine training. It was rappelling. They had range instructors and land nav instructors, and guys, Marines that weren't drill instructors, but they were black hat instructors. They had just a black T-shirt on, and you know, it said instructor on it in their name, and they were Marines. They were relaxed, everyday Marines. They weren't these regimented drill instructors. So it was our turn to go do the rappel tower, and I get up to the top of the platform, and I'm in line, and you know, you're supposed to, you know, I'm watching everybody. I'm kind of studying what they're doing because I'd never rappelled from this height. I've rappelled at Millersburg Military Academy a few times, but never at this height. And I'm watching everybody, and you know, you put your feet on this bar, you grab the rope, and the black hat instructor looks at you and says, you ready? All right, go. And then you jump out, you catch yourself with your right hand, and then you just kind of slowly rappel down. And he was asking everybody, as they went down, he said, where are you from, boy? And he was probably from Louisiana or somewhere down south. And he was asking everybody where they're from. And anybody that was from the south, he was like, oh, man, well hell yeah, man. That's awesome. You're from South Carolina. That's killer. And when it came my time, he said, son, where are you from? And I said, I'm from Kentucky. He said, well, hell yeah. He said, well, when you get over there on the bar, mount it, and when you jump out, give me a big old hell yeah. And I don't think I really thought twice about it. And mind you that as we're up on the rappel tower, there's a pit of drill instructors down at the bottom. And so I looked at him and I said, all right, I'll give you a big hell yeah. And so I mounted the bar and grabbed the rope, and as I jumped out, I put my hand out like a cowboy and said, hell yeah. And all I remember is just hearing this, like, I mean, it was outside, but there was this dead silence. And about 6 drill instructors said, What? And I stopped myself and looked down. And I saw my drill instructor look up at me and say, Gayheart, get down here. What are you thinking? And I slowly let myself down. And so I'm on the ground, and the drill instructor looks at me, and he's just flabbergasted. He can't believe what he just heard. Because you're not supposed to have any candid speak, much less slang or cursing or expression of oneself in boot camp at all. You know, much less on the rappel tower outside amongst other drill instructors. And he grabs me by the arm and he takes me over to the fence line, and he takes my helmet off me, and he hits me over the arm with, and he said, "What are you thinking?" I said, "This recruit doesn't know." And at that point I was at attention. I said, "This recruit doesn't know, this recruit doesn't know." And he said, boy, and he reached his hand out and he grabbed my nose and he pinched it and he twists. And at that point, I just had this rush come over my head and blood ran down my face. And he looked at me and he said, "Look what you made me do. Look what you made me do." And I said, this recruit doesn't know, sir. This recruit doesn't know." And in my mind, I'm thinking, like, what in the hell is going on? What just happened? So I'm sitting there at attention. My nose is throbbing. There's blood dripping all over my camis. And he takes me into the bathroom and he says, "Look what you made the drill instructor do. Look what you made him do." And he pointed at myself in the mirror. Blood everywhere. And he grabbed 2 paper towels and he threw them at me. And he said, "Clean up, get outside." And so I spent the rest of the 3 weeks in boot camp with a broken nose. Yeah.
Why do you think he reacted? Why do you think he reacted that way?
This was a drill instructor that, amongst other drill instructors, was pretty highly respected. He was a good drill instructor. He was he instilled a lot of discipline and was good at what he did. But he had a really quick temper, and I think when he realized that, he felt out of control. He felt as though his recruit platoon was recluse. And I think his emotions got away from him. And I think about it all, I think about it all the time, about why he did it. Because I'm about his age now when he did it, and how I would react. And I wish I saw him in the fleet. I wish I did. Because I would have, looking back on it, I could have ruined his career like that. But I think that was my mentality. That kind of set the pace for me as a Marine. I didn't tell on people. I made things right, but I didn't tell on people. I didn't ruin anybody's time in service. I didn't ruin any, or try to, spread malicious rumors or things about other Marines. So I think it was a wake-up call, honestly, for me, because I became more serious after that. I took the Marine Corps a little more serious, and I was always able after that to focus in on the serious matters.
After boot camp, everybody goes to their specialty school.
Mm-hmm.
What was your specialty?
I enlisted as a electronic communications, and I went on to 29 Palms, California, to the big comm school out there. And I had intentions to do data, and I ended up going to a radio course and doing field radio operator and some satellite communications. And I ended up going out there and really excelling in that, in the technical field. And comm school was really, really hard to me. I mean, technically it was demanding technically, but it's to be a non-combat MOS. It was very physically intensive the way that they trained you, because we ran and ran and ran and ran and ran in the hills of 29 Palms, where you don't sweat. And I did really well. I graduated third in my class and got to pick a duty station. And I had this long dream sheet of where I wanted to go, and I was thinking about how my worldview didn't leave, 468 McDowell, Frankfort, Kentucky. So I chose the farthest place I could get, which is Hawaii.
So did it end up being the job you wanted to have?
No, not necessarily. After being in, I wanted to be a grunt. I wanted to be, I always saw them, and though my job put me in a line company anywhere I went, I was always in the position to where anything technical they could turn to the comm guy. And I liked it because, I liked people relying on me, and I liked being the go-to guy for a lot of things. But there were times where I just wanted to be able to do my job and go home at the end of the night sometimes. But that's not to say that, I really took pride in what I did and did it to the best of my ability.
So you said you got stationed in Hawaii. How is it over there in the middle of the Pacific?
It's a vacation station. I got a lot of advice from my recruiter, because my recruiter was stationed in Hawaii. And it all kind of stems from him. But I had a really good friend in school that was from Hawaii. And we were on a bus one time, and he was telling me about where he lived. And I always imagine it, a kid from Kentucky, I always imagine Hawaii as, he was telling me about his house. And I was like, man, I bet it's like a mud hut with drapes, with no doors and outdoor bathrooms, and you're sitting on a bluff looking over the ocean. And he was like, no, man, I live in the city. It's like, beach is like a block away. And I'm like, oh, okay, well. And so he really put me on to Hawaii. And from there on out, I wanted that to be my duty station because of all the good stories he would tell me about it, and him growing up there. And anybody that you meet from Hawaii loves their home state, and I wanted to experience that. And the day I found out I was going to Hawaii, I called my recruiter and I told him, I said, I'm getting stationed in Hawaii. And he said, oh man, that's awesome. I was stationed there. And he's like, and he's a funny person, this guy. And he looked at me, or he was on the phone with me, and he said, it's a tropical duty station. I said, yeah. He's like, well, you don't have to check in your alphas. And across the Marine Corps and across a lot of military branches, when you formally check into a unit as a new member of that unit, you check in your service uniform, the full green uniform, with all the medals and the hat and everything. And it's a really uncomfortable uniform if you've ever worn it. And so he told me over the phone while I was still in California, even before I went, he's like, man, you can check in your Charlies. It's a tropical duty station. You can wear your Charlies. It's a short sleeve shirt with, you know, your green slacks, and you can check in that. And I was like, all right, this is starting off my Marine Corps career right. Because I kind of had that laid back, everything's kind of a joke attitude. And so I went home on leave, and when I was getting ready to go back out to Hawaii, or go out to Hawaii, I prepped my Charlies and didn't prep my service uniform. And I got to the airport in Hawaii, and the duty driver picked me up, another Marine, and I was in my Charlies. He said, what are you wearing? I said, I'm in my Charlies, man. This is a duty station. Or this is a tropical duty station. He said, man, you need to be in your Alphas. So I said, I don't have them. They're in my sea bag, man. They're stuffed in the bottom of my bag, and they're wrinkled. And he said, all right, man, I got you. And he took me all the way out to his apartment. And he gave me his uniform, let me check in his uniform, nicely pressed. And I bought that man beer for the rest of my 4 years in the Marine Corps, because if that would happen, it would have been bad.
So you got to know this guy?
So I got to know this guy, and he was a really good guy. And Hawaii was, I remember getting there and being on the car taking me into base, and I remember looking up at one of the road signs, and it said the Like Highway. It was like, in probably my best country voice, I said, what is the Like Highway? And the guy looked at me and said, man, it's the Licky Licky. I said, okay. So there was this whole new culture to learn, this, you know, new place to explore, so I was really excited about it.
Well, what unit were you stationed with over there in Hawaii?
Initially, I was with 1st Battalion, 12th Marines, which is an artillery battery. And I later on got attached to a liaison unit that operated with the line companies and naval gunfire.
How long was it after you got there to your unit that you ended up going overseas?
Oh, it was after my 3rd year in the Marine Corps. And I was doing constant deployments I did a pump over to Okinawa. I did...
What's a pump?
Pump is just a 6-month tour. And we would do these rotations amongst the companies for 6 months in a full rotation, in an 18-month rotation, over to Okinawa. And I spent 6 months there, and from there we would go to Thailand and Australia, and our unit participated in the tsunami relief over in Indonesia off the USS Essex. And so I did a lot of training missions up until I went to Afghanistan, and it took 3 years until I got the call to go. So,
why was it that some units were deploying over to Afghanistan and Iraq while other ones weren't?
Well, our unit, my liaison unit was, and our artillery battery or battalion was unique in the sense that any company could have been picked to go with the grunt battalions with 1, 3, 2, 3, or 3, 3. And it just so happened that Charlie Company, and I was in headquarters in an Alpha, Charlie Company got picked to go support 1, 3 over in Fallujah, not our company. And there were more seasoned forward observers to go over there than from liaison than the rest of the guys in our unit. So we just kept missing the boat to go over, and so we trained, and we were stationed in Hawaii. And I thought that I thought for the longest time that I was going to get out without serving overseas, and you know, as everybody else would say it, dodging the bullet, dodging the deployment. And I worked really, really hard at my job. I try to be the resident expert in anything that I would try to do. And I kind of had a name for myself. So, you know, the reason that when I asked to go to Charlie Company, you know, to go overseas, they were like, you're too much of an asset right here. And you get mixed feelings when you hear that, because it's like, well, can I be an asset overseas, you know, fighting the enemy, or, you know, supporting the war? And instead of doing like training or monotonous tasks in garrison. And so that it wasn't anything that I dodged myself. It was just something that just kept missing me. And I remember I was home on leave, and we had just gotten back from Okinawa on a pump, on a 6-month tour over Okinawa. And my buddy called me, and I was in the basement of my parents' house in Frankfurt doing laundry. And I got a phone call from my buddy Lao Chan. And he said, "What's up?" I said, "Not much, man." He's like, "Well, we just got out of formation, and you, me, and Lar all got picked to go to Afghanistan with 1-3, Charlie Company." I said, "Awesome. What, seriously?" And he's like, yeah, they needed 3 guys from liaison, and we were handpicked to be part of a fire support team.
So right then at that point, everything that you had ever done in the military leading up to 9/11, all your boot camp, your training, 3 years in the Marines, and everybody around you has dodged the bullet, so to say, and you finally get called up and told you're going to go Afghanistan. What was going through your head when you hung up that phone?
Don't tell my mom. Because I was at home. I thought about, there was these rush of happenings went through my head. Like, all right, I'm going to Afghanistan. I'm getting to go to the show. I get to go put all of this training, this hard work to good, you know, to use. And I immediately thought about how my mom and my family, they always had these reflecting moments in the living room or in the kitchen and say, "I'm just so glad you're not in Iraq or Afghanistan." That's what I thought about. It's like, well, I got something to tell them now. And at that moment, I hung up the phone, and I think I finished folding a shirt, and I kind of put my hands on the washer, and I was like, and I thought about those things. I thought about, all right, this is good. This is a good thing. I get to go finally serve my country on the front lines, not only at a duty station or in a uniform or on a ship or in a barracks. I get to go carry my weight. And then I thought about the who's going to be my unit, who's going to be, because those FIST teams, there are 3 or 4 main units. It's like, who's it going to be? And I started thinking, well, what if it's him? Well, gosh, I hope it's not him. What if it's him? I hope it's him. And And those are the things I thought about before I went and got my stepdad. I went upstairs and I said, come back downstairs with me. And he said, what's up? And I said, I'm going to Afghanistan. This was like 5 minutes after I got off the phone. He said, what? I said, I'm going to Afghanistan. He's like, we can't tell your mom. And he had the same sentiment as I did, because we knew that it would have done nothing but cause anxiety and pain, and I still had 7 months of workup to do. So I went back to my unit, and it was on this fast track to, training for, cast missions, artillery, air. We would go to the war classroom. We would do simulations in the classrooms, and 3 or 4 month Mojave Viper out in 29 Palms, big training exercise. And from there, I really felt confident. I felt confident in the unit I was going with. I was going with Charlie Company, 1st Battalion, 3rd Marines, which they were a big force over in Fallujah, and the majority of these guys were Fallujah vets, except for some of the senior ones that were getting out as we were going to Afghanistan. So I had this really good sense of confidence, and I had a really, really good team. I had a really, really good fire support team. One of the best lieutenants, now captains, that I've ever worked with. He was indispensable as a leader, and a fellow corporal that he and I worked very well together. So I was really, really confident when going over Afghanistan. And about 3 months before I was about to deploy, we told my mom. And just with anything, she had a million questions. Who are you going with? What are you doing over there? What's your mission? What's your job? And I couldn't tell her much, because you don't know, even after all the training, you still don't know yourself what the environment's going to be like, what the province is going to be like, what the people are going to be like. And I think I communicated to her the caliber of the men that I was going over, the caliber of the unit that I was going with, and communicated the confidence that I had in my team, and how much I looked up to and trusted my lieutenant before going over there. And like I said, that she had this nervous support, this apprehensive support.
So when you finally told her, you think it was more anxiety, or you think it was more of a burden that kind of lifted up off of you?
I felt bad for not telling her. I had done a full workup in 29 Palms and a Bridgeport cold weather training, and in my head I was already there. In my head I'd already deployed. So I think when I told her, it was really matter-of-factly. I gave those supporting comments, but I think that, the type of relationship I have with my family is that, we take heed to the things that we say, especially to my mom, because she's got health issues, and at that time, before that, she was having this fluttering heart. She's diabetic, and so we didn't tell her because she was having this fluttering heart, and it was like, and it might have been selfish at the time, but who would have known what her health would have been like if we did tell her and she had 6 months of stew on it? And you know, looking back on it, I did feel bad that I didn't tell her about it. You know, I was in units with guys that didn't tell their parents they were in Iraq till they were in Iraq, or they were in Afghanistan till they were in Afghanistan. They didn't tell them about their deployments. I had a roommate that didn't tell his parents that he was in Okinawa for 4 months. And by no means was I going to do that, but I wanted to set things straight. And I do feel kind of bad that I didn't tell her from the get-go, but I think it was a necessary evil.
Stop.
I'm sorry.
Can we stop?
Yeah. Together. We are rolling.
So when you first got to Afghanistan, what were your impressions of the country immediately?
Rural. That's what I thought about. We got there at night, and we stayed in the large Air Force base in Kabul for 4 days, and then we hopped a flight and went to an air base. Can't even think of it. And stayed there for another week, and then we made a convoy movement at night all the way to our forward operating base in Asadabad in the Kunar province. And at night, that's when most of us would travel to and from the FOBs, because that's, you know, you move when they sleep, basically. And I remember going through the town and going through the different villages and making our way up there, because it was an all-night trip. It took about 5 hours to get all the way up to our operating base, and I was in the back of a truck and staring out onto the scenery at night. You really can't see anything but flashing lights, and you know, they told us that they have very archaic ways of communicating in Afghanistan, and a lot of the times they would take up Morse code or just use very simple code by flashing lights to communicate with others, you know, other sides of the mountain. You know, just like I'm here. Or,
you mean the Marines or the Taliban?
The Taliban. That's the way that they would, you know, in our training they would tell us that, you know, they're not a very sophisticated group of terrorists. They're use very archaic ways to communicate. So they would use a lot of Morse code or flashing of the lights. And you know, being in the vehicle and you're a week old in Afghanistan and driving for 4 hours in the back of a truck, and you've heard the stories of IEDs, and you've heard the stories of ambushes, and I had read a lot about the Soviet War and the tactics that the Mujahideen had used on the Soviets, and we were the Soviets modern day in their position. We were traveling on the roads and we're fighting against, you know, the Taliban, who can maneuver up and down these hills and know these hills like the back of their hand, and they defeated the Russians really badly with some pretty sophisticated, coordinated attacks, and that's all I thought about on the way up to our operating base, was that, oh, there's a flashing light. What is that? You know, it's different because you go into country and before you get in the trucks, you know, everybody's doing their checks. They're checking everybody's gear, and you know, you're making sure that you got all your rounds and all your stuff's tight. You got enough batteries in your MPGs, and you know, they say go condition 1, and condition 1 is when you rack your rifle back and a round goes in the chamber, and that's when you know it's real, because you're about to get in the truck and you just with a loaded weapon. And up until then, you're in training, and you're at condition 4, which is no round in the chamber. It's a different feeling when you pull that rack back and it's almost like a light switch. It's on.
Is that how it is most of the time? Condition 4, not having a round in the chamber. Is that what it was like before you got to Afghanistan?
Mm-hmm. In training, you don't necessarily train. There's live firing ranges, but you don't walk around in a truck on a base in any type of training environment with a loaded weapon. You usually do it with sim rounds, or you do it with some type of blank firing apparatus. So for me to get out and go to the truck and about to hop in this convoy and pull your rack back and you go condition 1, that thinking, looking back on it, that's when you know it's real. That's when you know that you're in country and it's serious. You've got a round that's waiting for your finger to just pull the trigger. That's all that's keeping you from.
How did your role? How did your MOS and your role with your MOS change once you got to Afghanistan, or did it?
No, my role, which was as a fire support team, was pretty consistent in Afghanistan, but it kept me really busy. We started operating, the 3rd or 4th day we got to our forward operating base. The night that the day that we got there, we had heard about, we had replaced an Army unit, and we had heard about their convoy back to the air base, and how they got hit by an IED, and about a quarter into the trip, and their first sergeant was killed. So we get to our operating base, we get to our FOB, and we're greeted with this mangled Humvee, whole engine block gone. Truck looked like it had just been grabbed and pulled apart. And I don't think any of us collectively looked at each other and was like, man, that's serious. That's their first sergeant died. The one guy that's probably the most protected individual in the unit. He's like the father. He's not supposed to get hurt. He's the first sergeant. He's supposed to be safe. He's supposed to give everybody else direction and he had been killed. 20 years in service, or 22, 3 years in service, and he was gone. And that really gave me a lot of anxiety about getting on the roads. I didn't care about hiking. I didn't care about being in the helo. It gave me a lot of anxiety about being on those roads because of the fear, because of the frequency of IEDs that were there. And my MOS was perfect for hiking. It was perfect for being in the hills.
Why is that?
Because we would be responsible for all of the artillery missions and all of the air missions that the line company would need. And in Afghanistan, they operate and rely heavily on artillery fire, because there's a lot of situations that you get in to where small arms fire is just not feasible from the distance that you are away from the enemy. It's effective, but not as not as effective as two 500-pound JDAMs. So I went on as many missions as I could. They would come down the pike and always say, "Hey, we need 2 FOs or a FIST team to go with this platoon. Lieutenant Ortiz, Corporal Gayheart, do you want to go?" Yes. We go out for a 7-day mission, come back. The next platoon would be going out. The platoon we went out with would rest. We get a day of rest, go back out with them. And it was being on the road in Afghanistan was the most nerve-wracking thing I've ever experienced in my life.
You were on the road. Did you have a lot of contact with locals at all? What was that contact like, if you did?
Passing by. There would be, when a convoy would go through a village, it would be almost like a presidential motorcade. That's how the people would come out and just watch you as you drive by. Military-age males, young females, older females in burqas, which was interesting, because there would be times where we would just be on foot and we patrolled through the village, and some villages were, you got a warm welcome. Some villages you got little kids coming up to you and pulling on your shoestrings or pulling on your cami pocket, and it was more of a playful adolescent encounter. But other times we would go through villages and there would be military-age males that would stare at you.
What's the implication behind military-age male? What is military-age male?
Military-age male is somebody that's about my age and just is not an elder. Looks like he would not have a problem getting up and down the hills. Maybe a new father, just started a family, maybe needing to make money for his family. It's a real impressionable age, 18 to 29, 18 to 27. So those were the ones that looked at Americans as a negative for their country, because they didn't experience the Soviet War. They didn't experience the things that their parents did. So they had to make up their opinion of our occupancy in their own way. And they absolutely communicated with their eye contact and their body language. And you as a Marine would always be on guard when you would come across men of that, age group.
Did you or anybody else in your unit receive any kind of training for learning how to communicate with them?
No, not really. You would have expressions for the first 3 or 4 months taped to your buttstock, but that ceased really quickly, because I found out that they didn't mess with us. Not face to face, not behind our backs. As we would pass them, it was just a look. Who's to know if they didn't plant an IED there the day before? But I had no negative encounters other than when we took some pucks in a village, person under U.S. control, and it was kind of interesting because it was my first time dealing with any type of they started calling them detainees. It was my first time ever dealing with any puck, and there's this whole protocol that you kind of had to go by after when went through a village one time. We found a huge cache of weapons and hundreds of pounds of drugs. And there was supposed to be this HVT, this high value target in this village, and we had kind of set up a cordon around it. And we ended up going in and pulling some pucks and putting bags over their heads, and we didn't have enough handcuffs, or flexi cuffs, so we would have to daisy chain them together and then carefully walk them down the hill, and they went off for processing. But that was an interesting experience. But other than that, I had no encounter with military age males, no negative encounter, and for the most part, they cooperated. They cooperated very, very, very easily.
You were talking about how you're always constantly worried about IEDs or mines or whatever. Was that the biggest threat you faced day to day?
Psychologically, it was I think it wore on every Marine's mind. We had been there. It was January 28th, 27th, and I was out on a mission in the southern part of our province, and another part of our unit was up in the northern part of the province that was over by the Pesh River Valley, and there was this one stretch of road called IED Alley, and or IED Cliff, and it's this bend in the road that it's really easy to not be seen when you're digging through there. No matter, since there's so much construction on this part of the road, there's no way to ever tell if it's been cut up or it's been dug into. So there's no way to tell if there's a raise in the earth or if there's fresh dirt on it. So there's no way to tell if there was an IED planted right there. And a convoy was going through there, and an IED went off, and Lance Corporal Grixey immediately was taken back to our base. Both of his legs were amputated, and he was taken to Germany, and he died a day later. And that word came back to our unit, and it was my first time ever being on a base where, or in a unit where somebody had died due to combat reasons. And the base goes River City, and I didn't know what River City meant, and I was like, what's River City? And he's like, all communications cut off. You can't call out, you can't get on the internet, you can't do anything.
What do they do that for?
It's so that the press or a family member or another, or the family member of the deceased of the KIA doesn't find out from another Marine or another person on the base. They completely cut off communications.
Did you know Brixley?
I didn't know him. I knew of him. There was my roommate was really good friends with him, and he had shared stories about him, but I didn't really digest it too much. I was like, he was a Marine, he died. It was really tough, but I got a mission tomorrow. I got to pack my bag and go back out. But then again, it's completely recycled that apprehension that I have about being on the roads. The whole time you're sitting in this truck, you're thinking, I'm going to blow up, 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 I'm going to blow up. And you don't know when it's going to happen. You have ECCMs, you have these electronic countermeasures and electronic countermeasures. You have these devices that are in your trucks that are supposed to shield you from the signals that are sent to these IEDs. But Lance Corporal Brixey and that first sergeant both had ECMs on their trucks. And somehow the IED was triggered through these electronic countermeasures that are installed on the trucks. They still were hit by an IED. So even that didn't give you a peace of mind. Even your chest plate and your body armor that you wear, because when you're operating out in the hills, you don't wear your throat protector, you don't wear your arm guard, you don't wear your crotch protector that goes to your thighs. But when you're in a truck, you suit up, because those things could potentially save your life or save a limb. And we didn't have AC. You didn't roll the window down, because if a blast from the side of a hill went off, you would get peppered. And the worst was being in a truck that didn't have 3-inch glass and wasn't up armored. The worst would be when you're exposed in the back of just the back of a truck with just nothing but like steel to hold you. And they designed them perfectly so your head stuck right over the edge of it. So the IEDs were a huge point of stress for me every time I got on the roads. I would, what's that?
Sorry, go ahead.
That would be something that I came to hate in Afghanistan, was getting in a convoy. I would have much rather hike for 30, 40, 50 clicks as opposed to getting in a truck to save a 6 hour, to save 5 or 6 hours. If it saves a life. And I started to have animosity towards, the commander that would put us in these trucks and take us up and down these roads. And then I think they started listening to our unit, and the engineers would get out there in the front. And it's as rudimentary and as elementary as it sounds. They would get out in the front of the truck, get out in front of the patrols, or in front of the hikes, and sweep with their metal detectors, and in a sector that completely covered the whole road. And there would be times where we would stop 20 minutes at a time. They do a controlled det and get rid of that IED. And there would be times where we would walk back and over the same road, and we'd find an IED on a path that we just got done walking over a day earlier. So it was real. It wasn't a myth that they were planting IEDs on us every single day.
Why do you think it was that we kept on using trucks to get around when we knew that eventually we were going to run into IEDs? Why didn't we always go on hikes, or always take helicopters or something else?
Well, we didn't have air support because of the earthquake in Pakistan. We were really, really, really limited on air support as far as troop carriers, Seabirds, because of they were supporting the people in Pakistan. So when you did get a helo drop, or you did get dropped by helo, it was a good day, because you didn't have to carry your pack, you didn't have to get in a truck, and there was a fear of the rockets. I don't know if you've ever seen Charlie Wilson's War. It was was when the Mujahideen had really started to win the battle against the Soviets, when they got rockets that were able to shoot down the helicopters, and they continue to do so in Afghanistan. They did with, you know, that tragedy that happened with the Navy SEAL team. And that was another reason why, when we even did get helos, that they would be rationed. So, and in that respect, towards the end of our deployment, we started operating completely on foot, and I was sore, and it was probably the most physically demanding thing that I've ever experienced, because when you go out for a 30-day mission, you have to take 20, 30 days worth of gear. And whether it's 15 clicks or 50 clicks, you've got to hike it. You've got to have your ammo. You've got to have everything that goes with you. And it was the most physically demanding place that I've ever been to in the world.
How did the rest of your unit stand up to all the stress that was put on, and how did you guys manage to somehow deal with the knowledge that you might get hit by an IED or a mine this time out?
I think after the fear wore off, it just became kind of this comedic joke. You know, this fearful laugh that you would always have. You'd always have guys sitting in the back of the truck, and you'd have one guy that might be new, or he might just be this nervous kind of guy that didn't like being in trucks, and you'd have the guy over there with the typical Marines or typical kind of garage talk was going on, and then there'd be a quiet guy sitting there in the back of the truck, and the guy from across the room would go, boom! And, you know, and I think that's the kind of attitude that everybody had, was that if it's going to happen, it's going to happen, it's going to happen, it's going to happen. If it's not, it's not. And it's a roll of the dice with those IEDs. And that's what's so scary about them. And I think, in my mind, I quit worrying about getting blown up. Towards the end of the deployment, I was putting down my window, put my arms out, hanging out. Because if it was going to happen, it was going to happen. And I wasn't going to mentally drain myself every time I stepped in a vehicle to think about, this is my last ride because of these IEDs. And it made you want to get out in the hills and find the enemy and find those big cache of dynamite, and, you know, raid a IED factory in the middle of the city. It would motivate you. You know, when they asked who wanted to go on that mission to raid the IED factory, I'm on it. Let's take these guys out. So that was just a big point. It wasn't constant small arms fire. It wasn't, you know, that we had sustained multiple casualties or KIAs. It was that we did sustain some, but they were at the mercy of those roads.
So all that time you were thinking, when is it going to happen? When is it going to happen? Did it ever happen?
No. And thank God. I had an angel on my shoulder the whole time I was over there. And our unit did. My team did. Because no unit I was ever with, nobody got hurt. There were some other platoons where some Marines have been hurt. And there was another company where a Marine was killed. And you had the Marine that had been killed in the IED. but every platoon that I was with, though we were in firefights, though we were in some pretty sticky situations sometime, nobody ever got hurt. And I walked away from that deployment lucky.
There's another aspect of guerrilla warfare, of striking at an enemy that can't fight you back, that is in many ways psychological. And maybe it can produce psychological type of wounds, even if it doesn't produce physical ones. So do you think at any time either you or anybody that you were with ever sustained any of those from that constant stress?
Yeah, absolutely. Even when you're in the hills, we had about a 25-day mission where we were providing overwatch for a platoon that was going into this every day, going into this village and capturing some high-value targets. And every night before I would go to bed, I would have these. The Taliban were never known for probing your lines. They were never really known for probing your lines. But there were a few instances up on our OPs at our base where they would go out in the morning and they would look at their claymores and they would be facing towards them.
What was that like?
Knowing that somebody's out there doing something and you have no clue, and they're doing it in such a way that, I don't know, like I said, when it got dark at night and I would pull out my sleeping bag and sleep on the side of the hill, I didn't have anything but a rock on the other side of me. And even though I had a line of Marines that were keeping the line, keeping a 24-hour watch, the thought of them probing our lines always kind of, rushed through my head. So out in the field, I didn't sleep so well. Back on base, I slept more than I've ever slept in my whole entire life. I would take 30 days out in the field, 2 or 3 days off, and for those 2 or 3 days, I would sleep constantly. I would only wake up to eat and shower. And I would have this, before I went, I would have this reoccurring dream. This dream that I would anticipate combat, and I had never been to combat. It was this dream that I was sleeping in this, I had made myself this body-shaped hole in the ground, and I'd slept in it, to kind of keep the heat in, and I'd put my mat down in it and put my sleeping bag, and I was sleeping in it, and there was this rock. There was this rock about the size of the length of my body that was about 6 inches high that was keeping me protected, and I would sleep behind that. This was before I'd even gone to Afghanistan. And I would have this reoccurring dream where I would rack out and I would go to bed and I would wake up to these muzzle flashes in the distance, and I would see the top of this rock just chipping, and sound like something out of a movie, the pings, and then I would wake up, and this was in a barracks in Hawaii that I would have these dreams, and as I went to Afghanistan and got on this hill and was on this mission for about 25 days, sure enough, the rock was bigger, but I dug myself a small little trench, laid my bag in it, went down it, went to sleep at night, and every night before the sun would go down, and the sun would be in our faces, they would hit us. The Taliban would fire upon us. It was simply and solely because we couldn't see them because the sun was in our eyes. And I found cover behind this rock, which was so ironic for me. And there were plenty of times where I would take cover behind the rock and use a radio to call in fire support, indirect fire support from the artillery. And we had 60 millimeter mortars down below us, and so I would call in for fire support and give them a grid because we had registered targets, and just give them a number. They already had the distance and the direction and the grid, and they would fire upon the pre-planned targets, and sometimes they would be off. You'd have to do a correction, add 50, right 50, and you'd walk the round onto them, and sometimes it would be short, and I wouldn't be able to get from around this rock to get my corrections through my binos, and I would have the gun line do it for me. I would have the guys that were, out with the automatic weapons out in front, give me, he's running right, add 500, add 100, and there would be times where I would step out and get a good eye on them. And after one particular mission, after one particular firefight, there was, during a firefight, you don't really realize that the dust is flying up around you, or there's really even much going on. You're just kind of focused in on what you're doing. And after the firefight was over, I had been in the prone position looking through my binos with my weapon, and after the firefight was over, I looked in the tree behind me, and it was peppered with rounds. I mean, it was right behind me. And I just remember one of the guys I was with, he was like, "Man, that tree is... Were you right there?" I was like, "Yeah, it was." And I didn't even realize it. So,
did you ever have that dream since then?
I have it seldomly, but the dream is real. The dream is not a fabricated version of what I thought combat would be like. It's a firefight. It's a really random, really uncontrolled, sloppy firefight. And it's not as graceful. It wasn't as graceful as I thought it would be. It wasn't as...
What do you mean by graceful?
You shoot on these ranges and you use this right form, and all the targets that you hit have a nice group of holes in them, and when you look through the binos, you get your grid and you do your corrections, and over the radio you're smooth and rehearsed and precise in training. This is me, just fire over, and it's just this rehearsed fire mission that you've done 1,000 times. In combat, where's my pen? And I wasn't, training kicked in, but I wasn't as smooth, and I wasn't as precise. The rounds didn't land as on target as they probably would have in training. So when I say it wasn't graceful, it was chaotic. It was a mess. It was, yeah.
So if you could go back with the experience you had now and change something as far as how the U.S. Conducted the war in Afghanistan, at least as much as you saw, what would it be that you would change?
I didn't like how we contracted the hired help to construct the buildings on our base. I didn't feel comfortable going out and running fire missions and shooting into the hills and then coming back and seeing Afghanis, military-age males, older males, on our base, building the building that I'm about to sleep in or go eat food in. And there were several occasions where we would find out that they would be informants. See, on the ECMs, on the electronic countermeasures, there's a certain frequency that you set them to. And if you don't know that frequency, you can't turn up the juice or turn down the level of frequency of which the button that you push to blow up the ID. And that was my fear. I was always worried that you have this device that it generates this random number, or generates all these numbers that we think that the Taliban are using to transmit on this frequency that's going to trigger this bomb. They're low level frequencies. And we would get these intel reports that it's blah 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 blah, these different frequencies, and we would all enter these in to our ECMs in our trucks, and these frequencies in a sense were going to save our lives. But if there's an Afghani working on our base, running around our trucks, working around our Marines, how could I be sure that they didn't take one of those numbers back to the Taliban, or change the numbers, or put a bomb in the truck before we go operate? So there was, we would buy things from them. They had a small shop down in the bottom of the base, and there was, it created a little bit of commerce between them and the Marines and the people that were stationed on that base, and I'm sure it was good for that regional economy. We come in and we buy $20 worth of DVDs, or they would cook rice and lamb for us, and there would probably be some type of economic incentive, but I couldn't get past that. If I could change one thing, it would have been the way that was conducted. Not only for the sake of the mission itself, but for the morale and for the confidence of the unit. Because that was something that I thought about a lot. Like, why is this guy on our base? He could be turning around later that evening, because not only is he pulling income from the federal government, or from the OGA or ODA or whoever's paying him, but he's probably turning around and giving information about, oh well, they're rolling out right now without this, or there's a six car convoy leaving right now, or a 6 truck convoy leaving right now, or so And it had to happen. So that would be one thing that I would change.
So you make it through Afghanistan. You've done your deployment to Afghanistan, and it's all over and said and done with, and you're back home. When it was all over with Afghanistan, was it how you expected it to be, or was it what you imagined war would be like even?
I expected it to be faster, constant chaos, because that's what you see on TV, and that's how you train. You don't train for a firefight to last 15 minutes and then to not happen again for 3 days, or you don't train to potentially get hit by an IED, or to walk down a road and have one blow up behind you. You don't train for that. So the training is repetitious, so you build muscle memory, and so you are precise, and so you are scripted on the radio and perform your actions without thinking. That's where the training kicks in. But the dull lull of war, of missions, is something I didn't anticipate.
So had you got out of the military, had you always planned on staying in, or did you plan on going to college?
Like I said, my grandmother set me down right after boot camp, right after I was in the fleet for a little while, and said, "Go, officer. That's where the money's at. You'll get your education." And I had seriously considered it. I had always made my education a priority in the Marine Corps. I always kept some class in my back pocket, because I knew that was the ultimate goal. It's not that I avoided college, it's that I put it on hold while I was in. So when I was in Okinawa on a pump, I took 2 classes there. When I was in Hawaii, back in garrison training, I took 3 classes there at Hawaii Pacific. Before I deployed out to Afghanistan, believe it or not, I signed up for a pilot program through the Coastline Community College to do correspondent work over in Afghanistan. I received my psychology and biology credit in Afghanistan in between missions. It was a correspondent program. It was a pilot one that was, I was the first person to use it overseas, apparently. They give you a PDA, and they give you an SD card, and all your coursework is on this PDA. And at the end of it, you take a proctored test. And I had a book to go along with it too. So that was kind of my routine. I would go on a mission. I would sleep, like I said, a lot in between missions. But the other side, my other time was spent finishing my biology class. And we had this, the only time I could typically get a quiet time in would be at night, around midnight. And the Afghan Special Forces would operate at night. And there was this Russian tank that they would run fire missions from. As they were out, as the Afghan Special Forces were out in the hills, they would call in and do fire missions with this old Soviet tank. And it would shake the base. And so I would be in my room learning about cell structure, and you would hear this insane boom, and dust would fly up, and I'd get distracted, but it was something that took a lot I don't think I would have been able to finish it if I didn't have the discipline that the Marine Corps taught me.
So you're a combat student then too, also.
A combat student. I've never heard of it like that. I didn't really tell anybody I was taking classes over there because, well, you know, it probably would have been like, taking classes? What are you doing? And especially the mindset that the Marine Corps always wants you to be in. Mission ready all the time. Eat, go to sleep, think about the next mission. Or don't go. And so I kind of kept that a secret. And that's why I said that I had such a good lieutenant, is because he was a huge advocate for that. And he was my proctor for it. So he was a huge advocate of me taking classes over there.
So did you find that taking classes over there in the military, did it help at all once you got back, or did your military experience help?
No. I mean, it got me in this routine of studying under extreme circumstances, or under really non-traditional circumstances. You know, I would take my PDA out with me out in the hills of the Korengal, and but I would say that discipline carried over in college quite a bit.
What was your impression of your classmates once you got back?
When I got out, I had planned for months. I had learned about this program that the United States Postal Service was doing in Louisville, where they would pay you to work third shift and then pay for 100% of your classes and 100% of your books. And I knew I was getting the MGI Bill, so I took that job, third shift. And I worked in operations planning. Basically a bean counter, data input. And I would go to work and mind you, I didn't grow up in Louisville. I grew up in Frankfurt, so I didn't know anybody in Louisville. I just moved there because of the opportunity. And I think I wanted to be away from the mainstream. I wanted to kind of transition and adjust myself. So my schedule became, I would go to work at 10 o'clock at night till 3 o'clock in the morning. And then I would go home and sleep from 3 until 8. And I would go from class from 8 until 5 o'clock in the afternoon. And then I would sleep from 5 to 10. And I did that for a year. And that was harder than the Marine Corps.
Did you even have time to make any type of interaction with any of your classmates at all?
No, and I think that's why I did it. I mean, there were some classes that I had taken that it required me to be engaged with the other students, but I always played it off. I always was like, try to find ways to not talk about me being in the military. I didn't want any opinions being falsely put on me, or I didn't want somebody talking about me while I was leaving class or even in class. So I kind of kept my experiences to myself. I mean, there would be times where somebody would ask me, why are you 24 and just, in school, or, just general conversation, and I would tell them, I was in the Marines.
What was it you were afraid that they'd ask you?
Well, if you've ever heard a conversation that a combat veteran has, or even a veteran has with a student or a civilian about their their time in or their time overseas, 100% of the time, or probably 9/10 of the time, the veteran is more uncomfortable than the civilian because they don't know what to say. They don't know how to word things because we have a whole different terminology and an aspect on things. I avoided it because I didn't want to see myself put in a situation that I didn't know how to get out of. Because I have a certain rhetoric with my Marine buddies, and I can talk about things in the way I talk about them. And it's harder for me to communicate those experiences or ideas or ideologies or feelings to somebody that doesn't.
So what are you majoring in then?
I'm actually a graduate of the University of Kentucky with a bachelor's in marketing and telecommunications, and I'm currently pursuing a MBA at UK.
So you had a grandfather that you never knew, right? That was an airman. And you said, what was his job that he did there?
I'm not sure. I think he was in the air wing. I think maybe.
Did he have a technical job?
I believe he was. I really don't recall.
Well, so your experience in the Marine Corps was technical, and that seems to have, at least in some way, carried over to your degree. Is there what do you have in mind for your future?
I want to finish my graduate work, and I've had a really good experience and humbling experience helping veterans and improving upon services at the University of Kentucky. And it's a humbling feeling to know that you're making a change in a large institution that so many people go in and out of, students and employees and faculty, that don't bat an eye at some of the issues, that don't bat an eye at some of the things that are wrong, that they just come in and out and say that's just the way it is. It's a bureaucracy. And I tend to have when I think about a problem, I don't think about how bad it is, I think about how to fix it. And I'm always thinking about the next step. I'm always thinking about, I look at a situation and see what's wrong with it and how I can fix it in a diplomatic way and in a responsible way. And I've felt that I've been pretty successful at that with the student organization and the issues that it's brought up at the University of Kentucky. And whether it's in a capacity that I'm dealing with veterans or not, I want to contribute towards UK because it's a school that and an environment that I've really became fond of. And one day I'd like to teach in the evenings and be an administrator by day at UK.
Traditionally, there's always been a lack of use of the Montgomery GI Bill by veterans to pursue a further education. With your work that you've done with the UK MBA, and you said yourself that you like to fix things. What do you think that could be fixed about maybe some of the veterans that are getting out of their branch of service and are trying to decide what to do with the rest of their lives, whether or not they should go to school or get a job? What do you think that could be done about that?
I remember going through it, and it was a ringer. It was a check in the box. It was so scripted. Nobody was in it. Nobody was passionate. And what's really, really, really motivating about this these past 5 years, is that there's some really, really passionate people that are involved with veterans issues. There's some really passionate veterans that want to help other veterans. And they need to have that mentality when getting out of active duty. Soldiers helping soldiers, Marines helping Marines. They need to get away from that stigma that you're getting out, you're a bad person. No, you served your country. Let me prepare you to do even greater things. And that is lost. That is just completely awash in the military, because as soon as you make the decision to get out, you're ousted. You're not necessarily ousted, but you become useless.
To the military?
To the military, to the unit, to the mission. And that's something that needs to be addressed, I think, in the big Army, in the big Marine Corps, in the big Navy. Because the transition out won't be that you let your unit down, or that you still feel like a rigid Marine or a rigid soldier, and so that transition into the classroom won't be so harsh. You can't teach, or you can't water down a Marines or a soldiers or a sailors or a Coast Guard or person's experience. You can't water down those experiences. You can't take away from those experiences to make that classroom, or to make that civilian I lost my train of thought. To make that civilian transition easier. You can't water down a person's experiences to make it easier on them in the civilian world. But to prepare them for what it's going to be like, and to be more cautious in those classes, is something that it's just something that needs to be stepped up in the military, because those transition classes, those TAPs that they send you to by mandatory, have just become a check in the box, and they haven't done anything useful, because you and I, or another veteran out there, can attest to that we all had a hard transition. And maybe it would have been better if there would have been some passionate people in these programs, but there's not. They usually throw the lowest common denominator in these programs, and they just teach the stuff just to get to the end of the day. And they don't really engage these Marines, and they don't engage these soldiers to really get ready for what's about to hit them, which is, you need a job. Are you going to get an education? Oh, well, you can use this, 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 and that. And it's sad that so many of these nonprofits and so many of these special interest groups have had to be so involved with veterans transition outside of the military, that the military doesn't work harder on trying to fix it before they get out. So I think one thing that's so great about the nation right now is how the nation has wrapped their arms around veterans issues. And a project like this, that with no agenda, just wants to hear a story like mine. And to be able to sit here behind a camera and talk about this is insanely humbling. To be able to share my story at such a young age, that's worthy of being put on a website or worthy of being put on film, is humbling. And if I could get a message out there to say that the military just needs to be more aware of what they're putting out into the civilian world. They need to be more cautious and more passionate about prepping them for that transition.
Well, I want to thank you for coming out and sharing your story today, and I want to thank you for your service
Thanks.
to the country. If you could give me your name and age, branch of service, and the war that you're a veteran of.
My name's Tyler Gayheart. I'm from Frankfort, Kentucky. I served in the United States Marine Corps in Operation Enduring Freedom in Afghanistan. I'm a University of Kentucky alumni, and I'm also pursuing my MBA at the University of Kentucky. Is that right? What'd I forget?